We've cut thousands of dollars without damaging the programming that you rely on. As we approach the end of our fiscal, however, we're in danger of coming up short. That's why we're asking you for your help. Alabama Public Television is an important service for everyone in Alabama. If APT is important to you, please call now, 1-800-239-4000, or pledge online at aptv.org. Thank you.
This program on Alabama Public Television is sponsored in part by Books A Million. Books A Million, a proud sponsor of Alabama Public Television and its mission of education for the citizens of Alabama.
Tickets are now available for the 2010-11 Silver Season at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, featuring encores of Peter Pan the Musical, Menopause the Musical, and Bear Country, as well as stirring Shakespeare like Julius Caesar and Much Ado About Nothing, plus much, much more. The Alabama Shakespeare Festival is a proud supporter of Alabama Public Television.
Learn something new every day, here on Alabama Public Television.
This year's gubernatorial debate coverage on Alabama Public Television is sponsored by the Alabama Citizens for Constitutional Reform Foundation, Inc., a nonpartisan organization dedicated to educate Alabamians on topics related to the 1901 Constitution. Visit bringitbackhome.org to learn more about ACCR's newest initiative, the Bring It Back Home Education Plan, to reach citizens in all Alabama counties. Alabama Citizens for Constitutional Reform, a proud sponsor of Alabama.
The gubernatorial debate on Alabama Public Television is made possible by Merchant Capital, one of Alabama's leading investment banking firms, promoting economic development and helping to finance with municipal bonds the infrastructure needs of our cities, our counties, and our state. Live from the campus of the University of Alabama, it's the 2010 Alabama Gubernatorial Debate, Uniting Alabama.
Disabilities Advocacy Program, Auburn Chamber of Commerce. We hope you'll join us for the second debate from Auburn University on October 19th. Tonight's discussion will cover a wide range of topics. After opening statements, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a direct question and then 1 minute for rebuttal and follow-up. A coin toss earlier this evening determined our order. The questions were submitted by citizens from around the state, and they have not been shared or cleared with anyone associated with either campaign. The audience here in Moody Concert Hall has promised to remain very polite. No cheers, no applause, no outbursts, except at this moment when we welcome Dr. Bentley and Commissioner Sparks. Welcome, gentlemen. As we determined by the coin toss, we'll open with a statement from Commissioner Sparks. Commissioner Sparks, you We'll have 2 minutes for your opening statement, and we're ready to hear from you now.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who had anything to do with putting this forum together. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of Alabama is hurting. With 10% unemployment, foreclosures of our homes at the highest level, education less than $1.5 billion less today than it was 3 years ago, not being able to take care of our senior citizens in Alabama. Folks, this election is about leadership. It's about educating our children. It's about moving this state forward. And it's about making Alabama a better place to live. And if you'll give me that opportunity to provide you that leadership, I will do that for the people of Alabama. I will make sure that every child in Alabama has an opportunity to go to college, and that the children of Alabama deserve voluntary pre-K. I will fight to give them that. And we will build roads from North Alabama to South Alabama with my $1.4 billion road program. You know, this is a tough time, and it's going to call for tough leadership. And I've laid a plan on the table that will help Alabama move forward without raising the taxes one penny. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley, your opening remarks.
Well, good evening. It's so good to be here in my hometown of Tuscaloosa, and I want to thank everyone that had anything to do with putting this together tonight, the students especially. Many of you students, this is the first time that you'll be able to vote. I'm so proud to see students involved in our political process. 16 months ago, I started a long campaign for this office for governor. As I've crossed this state, I have met so many wonderful, generous, kind people in this state, and I appreciate them so much. You know, Alabama is a wonderful state filled with wonderful people, and every time I meet one, it makes me appreciate Alabama that much more. You know, Alabama faces a lot of challenges right now. Our economy casts a dark, ominous cloud of uncertainty on business, large and small. And this results in high unemployment, and it results also in shortfalls in our state budgets. Over 200,000 people today are unemployed. You know, they don't want a handout, they just want a job. And I want Alabama jobs to go to Alabama workers. To remind me every day that my main mission is to put people back to work. I am not going to take a salary as governor until we reach full employment, which is 5.2%. Putting people back to work must and will be my main mission.
Thank you. We're ready for the questions section now, and I remind you both that you have 2 minutes to answer, and then you'll each get a minute to rebut. The first question goes to Commissioner Sparks, and it's about education. Needs abound at all levels of public education in Alabama. As governor, how would your budget proposals address the competing demands of K through 12 versus higher education, and how would you avoid proration?
Well, I don't know that we can't avoid proration, but I'm the only candidate who's laid a plan on the table. You know, the state of Alabama is $1.5 billion less in education today than we were 3 years ago. That's why I'm going to tax gambling in the state of Alabama at a rate of 25 to 30%, and I'm going to put that money in the Education Trust Fund and Medicaid. The children of Alabama deserve it. When less than 7% of our children in Alabama get pre-K, and you know, that's just unheard of. We've got to do something to help our children. I want to put more money in the Education Trust Fund so that we can have more money for higher education and early childhood.
Dr. Bentley?
Well, first what we need to do is we need to adopt the 15-year rolling average budget. That way we smooth out all the ups and downs of the budgetary process. Had we done that 15 years ago, this may have been the only year that we'd have gone into proration. So we must avoid proration by adopting that type of budgetary process. The second thing we must do, we must get health care costs under control. This past year, of the $5.3 billion budget that we had, $982 million was PHIP. We must get that under control. 2 states, Indiana and Michigan, have adopted health savings accounts for their teachers. I believe that we could save as much as $100 million if we would adopt health savings accounts for our teachers here in Alabama. The third thing we need to do is we need to allow more local control of education dollars. If you give more to OCE, which is other current expenses, and allow the local school boards to decide what needs to be done with that money, that makes it easier for them to work out their budget. We need to do other things, though. We need to go as far as a retirement system for new hires. We need to go to a 30-year retirement. We also need to have what is called a defined contribution plan for new hires rather than a defined benefit plan. And long term, this will help.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for rebuttal, Commissioner Sparks.
You know, the bottom line, the state of Alabama is hurting. Our education system's hurting. Teachers are having to reach in their pockets and buy supplies. Children are having to go into the streets begging for paper and pencils and soap. It is our responsibility to come up with some additional revenue so that the children in education in Alabama is not in the situation it is today. It calls for leadership. It calls for courage. It calls for us reaching across party lines and working together to find solutions to help our education system in Alabama. And that's why I am going to tax gambling in Alabama and put it in the Special Education Trust Fund.
You know, part of the question was addressing the competing demands between K through 12 and higher education. Briefly, would you like to address that issue?
Yeah, the competing demands is that we got to have more money. Higher ed needs more money. Early childhood needs more money. And if we don't have a plan to find more money, the competing demands is going to be greater than it ever was. We've got to have additional revenue, and I have a plan to put that revenue into the Education Trust Fund.
Dr. Bentley, you have 1 minute.
The way you fund education is to create more jobs. 54% income tax, 26% sales tax, 4% use tax. That's what funds education. So we must put people back to work. And as long as our Constitution remains the way it is at the present time, that is the only way to fund education adequately. That is broaden the number of people that we have working today. We have seen a fight for years in the legislature between K through 12 and higher ed. I would like to address that. We have tried to do a 2-to-1 match, 2-to-1 basis. And as far as I'm concerned as governor, I would like to keep it at that.
Thank you. We're going now to our second question. It goes to you, Dr. Bentley. A reminder, you'll have 2 minutes to answer. Again, sticking with the theme here, education appropriate, since we're on the campus of the University of Alabama. The state's application for Race to the Top federal funding of education came in dead last. What specific proposals do you have to improve the state's standing and make the state more competitive when it comes to such grant applications?
Well, I'm not sure I was never really for the Race to the Top money.
Why?
And the reason I was not for the Race to the Top money because it had strings attached. And anytime you have federal dollars that have strings attached, I'm opposed to that. And the Race to the Top money had nothing to do, first of all, with charter schools. Race to the Top money had to do with in-service centers at universities. And you had to have rules and regulations put in place. Once that money was gone in 4 years, those rules and regulations remained in place. So I have never been a proponent of Race to the Top money.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 2 minutes.
Well, I was for the Race to the Top money because I believe that every school in Alabama ought to be an innovative school. And I believe that we've got to get AEA and the Department of Education working together so that we can apply and make every school in Alabama. That's why I would implement the 21st century framework so that we start teaching our children to compete globally. You know, our children don't compete against Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. Our children compete against India and China. And that's why we have to teach our children in a way to where they can compete globally. And that's why we need to do everything that we possibly can to go after that Race to the Top money so that we make all of our schools innovative schools so that we can compete globally.
In your 1 minute rebuttal, would you like to also address, would you pursue charter school legislation as governor?
I'm not opposed to charter schools, but I believe as a conservative that anything new that comes into this state should be done on a pilot program basis. And so the way I felt that we should have charter schools in Alabama is to pick a certain number of charter schools, put them in place, see how they work. If they work well, then we can spread them all over the state of Alabama. But that only added 40 points to the 500 points in the race to the top money. So not having charter schools had nothing to do with us not getting the race to the top money.
Your rebuttal?
Yeah, I would oppose charter schools. Only 15% of charter schools in this country have been successful. You know, I believe that we need to make every school in Alabama an innovative school, and we need to give every child, regardless of where you live, whether it's Wilcox County or Mountain Brook, Alabama, the same opportunity to have a quality education. And as governor, I will make that happen. And we will fight for every dollar we can get to put into our education system.
Thank you. This next question starts with you, Commissioner Sparks, and we're going to turn now to issues on the Gulf Coast, my home. Alabama's Gulf Coast, as you know, has been suffering both an economic and an environmental challenge, a disaster, some would say, with the BP oil spill. First of all, do you favor a state lawsuit to hold BP accountable? And second of all, what is the state's role? What should the state do to help the Gulf Coast recover?
Well, I do think it's the state's role, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that BP is held responsible for what they've done to the state of Alabama. I don't believe BP has been honest with the citizens of this state. And if it takes a lawsuit to make sure that that happens, then I would support it. But I would hope that BP would step forward and quit and stop going to Texas hunting for judges. I think it's time that we make BP pay for what they've done to the state. I'm the one who said we ought to take caps off of BP. There's not any caps on the number of jobs we lost in the Gulf Coast. There's not any caps on the environment that we lost on the Gulf Coast. There's not any caps on the number of people that's been put out of work. Then why should there be caps on BP? I can promise the people of Alabama that if I become the governor of this state, I will hold my foot on BP's neck until they make Alabama whole like it was before they got here.
Dr. Bentley?
Well, we have to look at two situations. First of all, we have to look at the private part where people have lost money, the tourism people, the fishermen. You have to look at that. And then you also have to look at how much money has been lost by the state as far as loss of revenue, as far as taxes are concerned. So those are two separate things. Really what the lawsuit most recently has been about is what the state has lost, not what individuals have lost. I personally have met with Feinberg, just like I think the commissioner has also. And I'm not too sure.
You're talking about the claims czar.
The claims czar,
Kenneth
yes.
Feinberg.
The claims czar. And I'm not too sure I agree with exactly what he says. In fact, I told him that I did not agree with the plans that he has for individual claims that are supposedly being settled right now. Now, I think that we have to make sure that BP pays for everything that they have lost. I mean, that we have lost because of this oil spill. Now, not only as far as individuals are concerned, but also as far as the state is concerned. I do believe over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to hear a significant settlement that's going to be brought forth by the federal government that deals with offshore leases and things like this. We're going to have some significant money that's available. So whether or not a lawsuit is necessary, I have not made up my mind for sure yet. I want to look at it more carefully before we decide on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 1 minute for a rebuttal.
Well, I just believe that we need to be relentless. We've dealt with natural disasters on the Gulf Coast, whether it be Hurricane Katrina or Ivan. This was not a natural disaster. This was a BP disaster. And there's people on the Gulf Coast that are suffering. And it is the responsibility of the governor and the attorney general of this state to make sure that every business, every citizen, every fisherman, anyone that's been damaged in the state of Alabama because of what BP has done, they need to be held responsible, and then we need to pursue every avenue we possibly can to make them pay.
Thank you. Response, 1 minute.
BP does need to be held responsible, and we need to make sure that they pay. The problem is what they have designed at the present time has a cutoff time of 3 to 5 years. And so we have to make sure that we know what is going, we don't know what's going to happen 10 years down the way. We really don't. So we have two things that we're looking at. We're looking at individual claims and we're looking at governmental claims. Now, governmental claims are a little different because we need that money right now. If we tie that up in court, we may not get that money for 10 years. And I can tell you our budgets need it next year.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with gambling in Alabama, and you'll get the first crack at this one, Dr. Bentley. You both talk a little bit about gambling in your campaign materials. I'd like for you to explain your position on legalizing various forms of gambling in Alabama, and also talk about whether or not you think Alabama voters should have a say in that.
I have said from the beginning that I will let the people vote. Now, I personally am against gambling. There is not a single state in this country that has benefited from gambling. You cannot take all that money off of the surface, out of the economy. You cannot take that money and tax it to make up the difference. So you hurt any economy through gambling. But I believe that you need to let the people vote on this issue. They want to vote on this issue. And I trust the people of Alabama because I believe they'll always do what's right. So I believe that they should have the right to vote if the legislature passes it. It's not up to me, and it's not up to my opponent. It's up to the legislature, and then it would be up to the people.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks?
You know, Dr. Bentley has said time after time again that he would rid this state of all gambling, that he opposes it, and that there's no state that's ever had any benefit from gambling. Let me remind you that the state of Georgia has given out 1.2 million scholarships. I'd like to give every student in this audience a scholarship. Let me remind you that there's been 1 million children in the state of Georgia that's had pre-K. If the state of Georgia quit educating their children today in pre-K, and Alabama stays on the path that we're on right now, it would take us 240 years to catch Georgia. Not only do I support a lottery, I will fight for a lottery so that every child in Alabama has an opportunity to get an education. It is wrong to pack debt on top of students that when they get out of school, that they can't hardly pay for the debt that it took for them to get through school. I will fight for the children in Alabama. I will fight for pre-K in Alabama. $20 billion is what education received in the state of Florida. 75,000 students in the state of Tennessee got voluntary pre-K. Don't tell me that lottery has not benefited those students. The problem is that Alabama is sending $250 million a year to other states and not taking care of our children in Alabama. I will fight for our children in Alabama, and I will make sure that they get an education they deserve.
Dr. Bentley, your rebuttal?
I will fight for the children in Alabama also. And I want to do that by creating jobs in this state, good paying jobs, so that people can send their children to college. And that's what I want to do. But let me tell you, I don't know how many times I have to say this to my opponent. And if he reads my webpage, he can see it from the beginning. I have said from the beginning that I will allow the people to vote if it passes the legislature. I trust the people. I believe they will do what's right, and I will allow the people of Alabama an opportunity to vote.
Thank you.
You know, Dr. Bentley talks about trusting the people to vote. Well, then why don't he trust the people of Tuscaloosa to vote on Sunday liquor sales? You know, you can't have it both ways. I will fight to educate the children in Alabama. The price of a college education is going up 3 times as fast as an average family income. I had a young lady the other day that stood beside me, and she said, you know, Commissioner, I make A's and B's in school, but my mom and dad's not going to be able to afford me to go to college, so I may have to live a D life. Let me tell you something. I don't want children in Alabama living a D life because government's not willing to help them. Government helped me go to college, and government helped Dr. Bentley to go to college. And I believe it's government's responsibility to make sure that every child in Alabama, whether you're rich or poor, has an opportunity for a higher education.
Thank you. Briefly, I'd like for each of you in 30 seconds, if you could, to also address the other forms of gambling that have become so controversial in our state. This conversation sort of focused on the lottery. Dr. Bentley?
Well, here again, I believe that if a bill is written by the legislature, that's who has to write these bills. It is not up to the governor. If a bill is written by the legislature, passed by the legislature, I believe that the people of Alabama wish to vote on it because they want to put this issue to bed. And that's why I think that we need to give them the right to decide whether or not they want any kind of gambling in Alabama.
Thank you. Commissioner?
I'd like to remind Dr. Bentley that the people have voted on it. There's 18 constitutional amendments in this state. What I want to do is put those people back to work that the governor has put out of work and I want to tax these gambling casinos in Alabama at 25 to 30%. That's $400 million. That's $400 million that we could help our higher education. That's $400 million that we could help early childhood education. That's money that we desperately need to help our budgets in Alabama. I can't imagine walking into the governor's office without a plan.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn our attention to immigration, and Commissioner Sparks, this is your first question. Several states have considered following Arizona's lead in requiring law enforcement officials to check people's immigration status. A federal court has struck down that law. It's now being litigated in the courts. But as governor, would you pursue similar legislation in Alabama? Do you think it's needed here?
I would not pursue the Arizona law, and I would remind the people that we don't border Mexico. But I am smart enough to understand that we do have an immigration problem in Alabama. And the one thing that I would do, there's three things that I would do, is I would pass one of the toughest immigration laws in the country. That if you're an undocumented worker and you get picked up by the police, you get no bail. If you're an undocumented worker in Alabama and you get government services or government assistance, we need to stop it. If you are a contractor in Alabama and you get state or federal money, contracts, then we need to make sure that you hire Alabama people. You know, we don't want to send a message that we want to stay in litigation the rest of our lives, but we need the help of the federal government. We need a comprehensive immigration law. We need them to stop them at the border so that we can do what we need to do in Alabama. So we need help from the federal government to help us. But I will pass the toughest immigration law in the country.
Dr. Bentley, 2 minutes.
Well, I believe that the federal government has failed this country in dealing with the illegal immigration problem. And it is their responsibility, but they are not living up to their responsibility. When they don't live up to their responsibility, it is the responsibility of the states to protect themselves within their borders. And I admire what Arizona has done. I am telling you, I'm not saying that we need a bill exactly like that, but we've had a 500% increase in illegal immigrants in this state in the last 10 years. That is significant. And we need to do something about that if the federal government is not going to do it. I believe in E-Verify, which will make sure that a worker is legal or not. All you have to do is check it. You check their Social Security number. In 3 to 5 seconds, you can find out if they're legal or not. Every state contract, I want to make sure that those people that are getting taxpayer dollars make sure that they are legal citizens. So I want to do that. And also, I believe that companies who willingly, knowingly hire illegal aliens are breaking the law. And I think they need to be fined, not shut down, not lose their license because innocent people will be hurt. But I certainly do believe that they should be fined for what they do.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 1 minute.
Well, I don't want to send a message as the governor of the state of Alabama that we don't accept all nationalities to Alabama because we are a trading mecca of the world. Look at Hyundai, look at Mercedes, look at Honda. But I will send a message that if you come to Alabama illegally, and if we pick you up, you'll get no bail. That if you want government services, you won't get them. And that if you have a government or a state contract, we better make sure that you hire documented workers. I will pass the toughest immigration law in the country.
Dr. Bentley, would you like to rebut?
Yes, on June the 7th, 2007, my opponent said, they're here, we don't need to criminalize them. On August the 14th, 2010, he said, we don't have the resources to enforce the immigration and that it is not up to the states. He said the same thing that day. He said, they talk about building a 12-foot wall on the border, and if they build that wall, I'm going into the 13-foot ladder building business. Now, I don't know what that means, but I can tell you that does not sound like that he wants the toughest immigration law that we can possibly have.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley, this question goes to you, and it's about economic development in Alabama. The state is experiencing record high unemployment, something that the country indeed is struggling with. But some places in Alabama have suffered from this problem for decades, particularly the Black Belt, which has some of the highest unemployment rates in the country. Wilcox County, for example, has a nearly 22% jobless rate. The national rate is 9.6% by comparison, so it's more than double the national unemployment rate. What would you do as governor to encourage job creation and economic development in regions like the Black Belt that have struggled for so long to climb out of poverty?
Well, I think what you have to do is you first have a short-term goal and then you have a long-term goal. Short-term goal is the businesses that are there, we need to help them with tax credits or tax deductions. Like I did in last year's session, we passed the Reemployment Act of 2010, which will give a tax deduction if you'll hire someone off the unemployment roll. But long term, what you have to do is you have to create an environment in this state, including the Black Belt, which will entice jobs into that area. We keep Alabama a right-to-work state. We have to have well-trained workers. We keep the cost of business low by keeping the cost of energy low, and we keep taxes low. We can't keep down unwarranted lawsuits, and that's very important for many of these areas. We also have to have infrastructure, and in fact, that may be the most important thing other than the right-to-work state part. We have to have infrastructure, and these areas don't have the proper infrastructure. So we need to be working on that. Now, you're not going to get the type of industry in some of these places that we will get in Huntsville or in Birmingham, like biotech industry. So what you have to look at, you have to look at the area and see what they have available. What do they have in Greene County? They have hunting, they have fishing, they have catfish farms, we have timber. So you try to get industries that will fit the areas. So I think that's very important, to look at the area, see what's available, see who can work there, and then you can bring industry in that will fit that area.
I'd like to follow up just briefly, give you another 30 seconds. Those industries have been there for decades, and the problem still exists. Those, they haven't been able to survive on timber.
Well, they have, you're exactly right, but you can expand on those. For instance, honey. You can have preserves. You can encourage the deer people to come in and have preserves and have people to come into that area to bring money into that area for honey. So, I mean, that's just an example there. But the most important thing, I think, is infrastructure. Then we can start to begin to get real industry into those areas.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, economic development in some of the state's poorer regions?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. Dr. Bentley keeps talking about the 5,000 jobs. First of all, I wish Dr. Bentley would explain how many jobs he's created up to this point. 0. We got to talk about giving somebody a job today, and if it is 5,000 jobs, my arithmetic tells me that's 1,200 jobs a year. That won't make a difference in Northport, Alabama. We've got to give thousands of jobs to the people of Alabama, just like I have as Commissioner of Agriculture, traveling the world, creating jobs. Over 90% of the utility poles that go to Cuba today comes out of Alabama. Over 50% of the poultry that goes to Cuba today comes out of Alabama. I stood at the docks of Mobile, Alabama, and told Vietnam and China that if you can't produce your food at the same standard we produce it in Alabama, it'll never make it to the plates of the people of Alabama. The catfish industry saved 2,700 jobs. But we need to be looking at alternative fuel. There's 2 things that we can do in Alabama very well: grow grass and trees. We ought to be coal-firing our furnaces, and using 10% of what we put in our furnaces ought to be switchgrass. We need to be a world leader in alternative fuel. In Alabama today, we used 2.5 billion gallons of gasoline. If we only had 10% of that in alternative fuel, that's 250 million gallons that we need to make in Alabama. That's how you create jobs. You create jobs by building roads from North Alabama to South Alabama. 38,000 jobs. That's why I said we will implement a $1.4 billion road program. We need thousands of jobs. That's what we need. And as governor, I will create jobs to help those people in that region so that they can take care of their families, pay their house payments, buy a car, and send their children to school.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Well, if Commissioner Sparks had read my bill, he would see that it was modeled after the Work Opportunities Tax Credit Bill in 2007 that created 4,600 jobs in this state. Now, no, it has not created any deductions yet, because you have to hire somebody off the unemployment roll and keep them for a year before it can be measured. We really don't know how many jobs this will create. Now, as far as his jobs plan is concerned, the $1.4 billion, the billion-dollar part comes from a bill that's already passed that I voted on. He can't take credit for that bill. He had nothing to do with that bill. That's Senate Bill 121, and you will vote on that on November the 2nd and amendment number 3.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 1 minute.
Yeah, I can take credit for that bill because I pushed for that bill just as hard as Dr. Bentley. And I'm going to add $400 million on top of that bill of Garvey bonds so that we can start building roads today. We need to start building infrastructure across Alabama immediately. It will create 38,000 jobs across this state. 30% of our bridges in Alabama is over 50 years old. People are driving on dangerous roads. We need to make these roads safer. I used to be a county commissioner. I understand what it takes to build a road. But I can tell you, it takes money, it takes commitment, and as governor of Alabama, I will make it happen.
Thank you. Our next question is about a popular subject, taxes. And we'll start with you, Commissioner Sparks. Some Alabamians believe state taxes are too high. Others note that they are lower here than in most of the other states in our nation. And some, including Governor Riley in his first term, say Alabama's taxes unfairly burden the poor. What do you believe is the case, and what changes, if any, would you make to Alabama's tax structure?
Well, I'm not going to raise the taxes on the working men and women of Alabama. And if you remember, Governor Riley laid a $1.2 billion tax package to raise the people of Alabama's taxes on the table, and it was defeated very soundly. What I've said is we're going to go back and we're going to tax gambling. That is the most obvious place to get money today. Let's don't play like the gambling's not in this state. It's been in this state for 25 years. The problem is we hadn't taxed it, we hadn't regulated it, we hadn't controlled it, and we don't have a statewide gaming commission. But we're continuing to let people travel from Alabama to Biloxi. 4 million visits last year. Loading buses every day, sending them to Biloxi. You know, people are buying lottery tickets every day. That's what we need to do. Go after the most obvious tax that's laid out there today, and that's gaming. And as governor, I will go after it and tax it.
Do you think Alabama's taxes unfairly burden the poor?
Well, that's why I've said that I would take the grocery tax off. As governor, I would take the grocery tax off. I think that is a very unfair tax, and as governor, I would take that off. But I am not going to raise the taxes on the working men and women of Alabama. I have signed a no-tax pledge, and I will live up to that commitment.
How would you make up the revenue if you eliminated the grocery tax?
Well, I'm the only guy that has a plan. I'm the only guy that says we're going to raise any revenue by gaming. My opponent don't have a plan to raise revenue. He talks about creating jobs. Well, I'm going to create jobs too. But how many children are going to fall through the crack waiting on these jobs? We've got to have revenue within the first 90 days, and I have a plan to do just that.
Dr. Bentley, 2 minutes to talk about what you would do, if anything, with Alabama's tax structure.
Well, I am not for raising taxes. I think the thing that you do not do in a down economy is to raise taxes. In fact, I think that if the federal government had done what they should have done 18 months ago and cut taxes on investments, on individuals, and on companies, we would already be coming out of this recession today. But they didn't do that. They spent a year on health care. And instead of wasting a year on trying to take over the health care system, had they done what they should have done, we'd be coming out of this today. I am not for raising taxes. Now, there are taxes that are not being collected in this state that we need to look at. Streamlined sales tax is one. We need to look at that. The taxes that are not being collected on internet sales, those are the streamlined sales taxes. That would generate $240, $250 million if we collected those. And they're supposed to be collected. We're trying to collect use taxes right now, and that's hard to collect because many times people don't want to report those. But I do think that there are areas, and I've been told as much as $1 billion of taxes are being uncollected at the present time. And that's not raising taxes. That's just collecting taxes that are already owed by people in the state of Alabama.
Do you believe that the state's tax system unfairly burdens the poor?
I don't. I am for taking the tax off of food, but I am not for replacing it by taking away the deduction of a person's income tax, their federal income tax, off of their state income tax. And the reason I'm not for that is because that hurts businesses. When you hurt businesses and you tax businesses, you're going to lose jobs. And we need to be creating jobs. And we need to give tax breaks to businesses, not hurting them.
How would you pay for it if you took off the grocery tax?
You just take it off, slowly, 1 cent a year.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Well, one thing that we strongly need to look at is no-bid contracts. You know, we've had no-bid contracts that's come up in elections for the last 8 to 10 to 12 years. But you know, in Alabama today, we have $2.7 billion of no-bid contracts. That's why I'm going to hire an inspector general. If we could get our hands around 10% of that, that's $270 million that we could put in education. That's $270 million that we could put in Medicaid. Because, you know, I want to make sure that the Children's Hospital in Birmingham gets funded. 54% of the money that funds the Children's Hospital is Medicaid. 90% of the children in Alabama today who have cancer go to the Children's Hospital in Birmingham. That's why I'm going to fight for additional revenue for Medicaid and education. That's why I'm going to tax gambling. That's why I'm going to look at no-bid contracts. That's why I'm going to look at loopholes for those who do business in Alabama and don't pay their taxes in Alabama.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley, you have 1 minute.
Well, I think that we need to look for areas of taxes that are not being paid, but as long as our Constitution remains the way it is at the present time, we have to realize that our education system is funded by growth taxes. And so what we're going to have to do is to make sure that we put people back to work in order to get those taxes. That's the only way you can get them. Taxing gambling is not the answer. Putting people back to work with real jobs is the answer.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley, you will get this next question first, and I'll remind you you'll have 2 minutes to give an answer. Given the scarcity of medical services in some areas of the state, the rising costs of health care, and the new federal law expanding access to health coverage, describe how you would approach this issue. Do you support the state's legal challenge of the federal overhaul of health care?
Well, I am totally opposed to the federal government taking over health care. That is absolutely the worst bill that has ever passed the federal Congress. If you want to see what's going to happen in this country, you just wait 10 years down the road when we have no primary care physicians in this state, when it's going to cost businesses and individuals trillions of dollars in taxes that we can't afford, when the elderly in this state will be without health care because they don't have primary care doctors, also because of the fact that there will be rationing of care. When this federal bill is going to cut about $500 billion out of Medicare, how are they going to fund it? It is not a good thing for this country. Now, do we need accessible and affordable health care in Alabama? We absolutely do. And I would ask everyone in the audience and watching on TV to go and look at my website and look at the part that talks about accessible and affordable health care in this country. We can do things on a state level. The thing that's nice about a state is we can be laboratories for change, and we can find out how things work. If they work well in a state, then you can expand it to the entire country. But see, they did not do that. They tried to take over an entire system, and people in this country are not going to like what's going to happen down the road. Now, it's going to be very apropos that possibly a governor of this state, the next governor, is going to be a doctor. Because I understand health care, and I understand how we're going to have to deal with this. So that is one reason that I ask the people out there to vote for me.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, you have 2 minutes.
It's pretty obvious this doctor hadn't read the health care bill. The one way that you keep the federal government from taking over health care in Alabama is do what the law says. We have got to pass legislation in Alabama within the next legislative session for our policies and our procedures of how we're going to deal with health care in Alabama. You know, I believe that we need to take the best minds we've got in Alabama, the University of Alabama in Birmingham, the University of South Alabama, the business leaders of Alabama, and we need to find the proposal that fits Alabama. And if there's problems with the health care bill, then let's go change it. But you know, I personally had an experience with people that didn't have opportunities for health care. I had a 42-year-old nephew that fell over dead in a Walmart parking lot because he never had access to affordable health care. I don't believe the people of Alabama want 42-year-old young men falling dead in a Walmart parking lot. I think the people of Alabama wants a governor that will show leadership. Quit pointing fingers at Washington, quit pointing fingers at Montgomery, but do what the law says and make sure it fits the people of Alabama so the federal government don't take over health care in Alabama.
Thank you, Dr. Bentley. You have 1 minute to rebut. And I would remind you, part of the question was, do you support the state's lawsuit that's challenging the new federal law?
Well, not only do I support it, I authored it. House Bill 42 was a bill that I authored. And what it said is that no company, no person, no entity, no health care provider shall be compelled to participate in any health care system. That's House Bill 42. I had that last year. We were able to get it from the Senate down to the House. We were just not able to get it through the House. But it did pass in Missouri, and they voted on in Missouri. And what happened was it passed 71% in Missouri. I think in Alabama it would pass 75%. Now, my opponent talks about his cousin that fell dead in the parking lot at 42. I'm sorry to hear about anybody falling dead at 42 in a parking lot. But I don't think this health care bill had anything to do with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks?
Absolutely it did. He didn't have access to affordable health care, Dr. Bentley. And if you don't have access to affordable health care, those are the things that happen. You know, Alabama needs leadership, and that's what I'm going to provide them. I want to make sure that every student out here, that when they graduate from college, they can stay on their family plan until they get a job. I don't want disaster to hit them within that 2 years so that they go bankrupt before they ever get a job. I want to make sure that these 56,000 small businesses in Alabama can afford health care for their employees. I want to make sure that people who have pre-existing injuries and pre-existing conditions don't get turned away and have to go die somewhere in a corner. I want to make sure that we deal with this law the way we should deal with this law, and that's get the best minds we can in Alabama, pass the best legislation we can so that the federal government don't take our program and run it for us. I'm going to provide that leadership. I'm not going to stand back and scream and yell.
Thank you. Your time is up. And we're running a little short on time, so we're going to do a quick speed round to get one more question in, if that's okay. You'll each have 1 minute to give your answer, and then we'll do a 1 minute rebuttal on it. And this is about constitutional reform. The first question will go to you, Commissioner Sparks. Alabama's Constitution is 109 years old and is the longest in the world. For years, suggestions have been made for revising the Constitution through either a called convention or article by article. Do you favor either of these methods, and if not, do you see any need for constitutional reform?
I do see need for constitutional reform. I don't see need of a constitutional convention. The Constitution will be in better shape when I leave office than when I come in. We need to change the Constitution article by article or amendment by amendment. I am committed to the people of Alabama to making that happen, and as governor, I will provide the leadership to make that happen.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley?
I believe that we should reform the Constitution article by article. I think if we can do that, I think that's the best way to do it. I will have to say this. As I visit across this state and shake hands with people in McDonald's for breakfast, I shouldn't say that. That's on the air, isn't it? I'm sorry. But I can tell you that the first question that they ask me has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has to do with whether or not they can feed their family. So the Constitution is not high on the list of most people out there, the average person out there, even though I do feel that it holds us back in many ways. And I do feel that if we're going to change many of the things down the road that affect this state, I think that there's some of the things in the Constitution that we need to change, but we should do it article by article.
Thank you. Commissioner Sparks, 1 minute.
The Constitution will be in better shape when I leave office than when I get there.
Thank you. Dr. Bentley?
I have no further no further comment.
Well, thank you both for addressing the issues that matter most to Alabamians. We'll now move into the closing part of this debate. You'll each have 2 minutes to present your closing remarks. And first, we will hear from you, Dr. Bentley.
Well, first, again, let me thank everyone that worked so hard on this. It's hard to put these things together, and I just want to appreciate all you students that work so hard on it. You know, when I'm here, I'm going to say Roll Tide. When I'm in Auburn, I'll say War Eagle. So I am proud of what the students have done and everyone else that's worked on this. You know, my number one issue is to put people back to work. You know, my opponent and I both agree on that. I think he wants to put people back to work also. The trouble is he and I disagree on the way that we should do it. I believe that we do it through allowing companies to put people back to work, and we take the government out of it. We make the government more efficient. And that's how I want to do that. I want to have an attitude adjustment in Montgomery. And the attitude adjustment is this, that the government is the servant and the consumers are taxpayers and people who own businesses. And when they get that attitude, I think that we can start to create jobs in this state. Some of the differences, though, between me and my opponent are this. Number one is I'm a pro-life candidate. That's number one. Number two is I believe in the United States Constitution, and I believe in Article 10 of the United States Constitution. I believe in the state sovereignty that is talked about in that Constitution. I oppose the takeover of the federal government. I oppose its takeover of health care system in this state, in this country. I think that is the worst bill that has ever occurred, and I am totally opposed to that. And the other thing is we have a real problem in this country, and that deals with illegal immigrants and illegal aliens in this country, and we're going to have to address that problem. And I applaud, as I've already said, Arizona and what they did. Only a governor can stand up to the federal government, and I am that governor.
Thank you, Dr. Bentley. Commissioner Sparks, your closing remarks, please.
Well, thank you. You know, earlier this week, Dr. Bentley challenged me to give you my tax returns, and I did, Dr. Bentley. I paid $11,000 on $79,000. You paid $4,800 on $200,000. You know, Dr. Bentley talks about not taking a salary, but it's a funny thing to me. He took the 62% pay raise that the legislature got. You know what changed all of a sudden? This campaign is about telling the people of Alabama the truth. This campaign is about leadership. This campaign is about courage to make tough decisions to find some solutions to some of our problems. It's about giving our children a quality education. It's about fighting for a lottery so that every child in Alabama has an opportunity to have a higher education. Dr. Bentley don't believe that. He stood in North Alabama and said, it's not government's place to take care of our children. Not all children are going to go to college, nor should all children go to college. Dr. Bentley, you're wrong. Every child in Alabama should have an opportunity to go to college. And if I become the governor of this state, I will fight to give them that opportunity. This campaign is about reaching across party lines. Quit pointing fingers at talking about giving Montgomery a bath. Dr. Bentley served in Montgomery 7.5 years. He did not introduce one piece of legislation on ethics. Let's tell the people of Alabama the truth. Let's talk about leadership, and let's talk about things that matter. I'm asking you, the people of Alabama, to give me an opportunity to help lead us through some of the toughest times that we've seen in Alabama today. I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for your prayers. God bless you.
Thank you both for being with us tonight. I think now is a good time to give the audience an opportunity to applaud. That ends tonight's debate. We'd like to thank the audience here at Moody Concert Hall at the University of Alabama. They have been on their best behavior and done a great job this evening. And those of you who have been watching and listening at home on APT or Alabama Public Radio. We also want to give a special thanks this evening to our sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Alabama, the West Alabama Chamber of Commerce, the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, and the Auburn Chamber of Commerce. A reminder that our second debate will be October 19th at Auburn University. Dr. Bentley and Commissioner Sparks, we look forward to hearing from both of you again there. And again, thanks for being with us here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
This year's gubernatorial debate coverage on Alabama Public Television is sponsored by the Alabama Citizens for Constitutional Reform Foundation, Inc., a nonpartisan organization dedicated to educate Alabamians on topics related to the 1901 Constitution. Visit bringitbackhome.org to learn more about ACCR's newest initiative, the Bring It Back Home Education Plan, to reach citizens in all Alabama counties. Alabama Citizens for Constitutional Reform, a proud sponsor of Alabama Public Television.
Hi, I'm Don. I'd like to invite you to join us here in the Woodsmith Shop. On every show, you'll see the step-by-step woodworking techniques and tips you can use in your